Hi everybody, I'm Sourabh. I'm one of the co-founders of CoRise, and we're an education platform focused on upskilling and reskilling people and helping them make career advancement. And today I am super lucky to be joined by Max and Scott. Max is a risk engineer at one of the fastest growing fintech startups in Ramp. And prior to that, he's been a software engineer at Neva, Airbnb, Databricks, a lot of interesting experience. And then Scott is a data engineer at Handshake, which is a company that helps other companies do university recruiting. And prior to that, Scott has had like a wide variety of fascinating experiences, from teaching English in Haiti to working at Coursera and a whole bunch of other interesting ideas. So before we start, I would love to hear from both of you on what got you interested in machine learning.
Go ahead, Max.
Sure. So I'd say back in college, machine learning, I did not take a lot of machine learning classes, although I took a few. And so my primary interests back in university was more focused around like computer systems, like operating systems, distributed systems, like that type of stuff, which sounded really interesting. And there was this like other thread, it was sort of a fad when machine learning and I think deep learning was like starting to really make some headwinds and come out. But frankly, for the first couple of years of work out of school for me, I wasn't really doing much machine learning at all. I was more of a generalist, like backend software engineer, doing like data and like other types of stuff. But I think it sort of came back into the fold because there's sort of, I think, this notion that machine learning it has already proved extremely useful in doing certain types of tasks, but I think it's becoming this like other mode of programming almost, where general procedural programming is sort of one way of approaching certain tasks, but machine learning has become a much more effective way at approaching other sets of problems. And so I think for me, it was really this like budding curiosity about how to solve like these different classes of problems with different techniques. And so that's when, and it also happened to coincide with like, the advent of like CoRise and the ML track. And I think everything sort of fell into place from there.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I started getting interested in ML like just a couple years ago, kind of as I got more familiar with data and like how different teams are using data. And the more I started working with data, the more I started to think like, okay, so like what else can be done with this data other than like, so as I'm a data engineer currently, so one of the things I do is like make that data available to like, in my position, other teams internally at Handshake. So then I started to wonder like, okay, well, what else can we do with this data other than just like help like a one-off team like make a decision about how they're going to approach something. And then like it's just been growing from there. I think sort of like Max mentioned, like CoRise popped up like at a perfect time. Like it was the beginning of the year, I had a learning stipend and I found these courses and I was like, oh, this is perfect. So that's like, that really jump started things for me, I think. And then like now my intention is to like move into an ML role like in the next year or so, but then in the meantime, I have like a lot of sort of like passion project type stuff that I would love to try to work with ML.
That's amazing. It's got a follow-up question for you. It's like, how much, like, had you done a whole bunch of like ML, like self-reading before you started the track, or was that
No,
like?
I just jumped in.
Okay.
I just jumped in and it was like, I had like various exposures, like, like reading on Wikipedia or something, or I also had worked at Udacity for a while, and my wife worked there for a super long time doing videos. So I just like had a sort of like osmosis type experience with ML because of like the courses they were teaching and stuff. But for the most part, yeah, just I was all fresh when the course started or the track started.
No, that's amazing. Matt, similar question. Like you had a very strong software engineering background. What were your expectations like when you signed up for the ML track? Like, what did you want to get out of it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I, at least initially, wasn't explicitly signing up for the track because I knew I wanted to change jobs or move into more of an ML role. But it was really mostly to sort of satisfy that curiosity and sort of broaden my my knowledge of problem solving. And so going into the track, my expectations were basically that the track would cover like several different branches of ML, like the first class applied ML, sort of covering the it's hard to say, like classical techniques of ML, like the non neural network types of like trees and decision trees and like other types of linear regression like models. And as I came to found out, or as I found out, like going through the track, you know, coming from hearing a lot of the buzz of ML and in particular deep learning, like my expectation was that, you know, the vast majority of the emphasis and like useful work or applicable work in the track would be coming out of like the deep learning side of stuff. But like, as it turns out in industry, like the classical techniques like tend to perform really well on lots of tasks. And so in hindsight, I really appreciate like the applied ML class because it like taught me a lot about models that are, one, very practical and useful, and two, that I may not have otherwise like studied if I was just doing this like purely by myself and you know, interested in the deep learning stuff. That being said, like the deep learning as a class was also like really interesting because it talks about like state-of-the-art models and how companies are using like foundation models to sort of build upon like, you know, really fantastic research from like corporate labs and academia. And then the last class, like data-centric deep learning, I think sort of tied everything together in terms of how to think about data and the importance of data in the whole life cycle of machine learning, and also how to think about like productionizing ML systems a little bit more than just the modeling stuff we did in applied ML and also the deep learning. So I think it was like, it really covered all sort of the bases of getting started.
That's awesome. I think it's like my big takeaways have been like the importance of getting a baseline. Like ultimately it is like when I was just starting out, I would like always run towards like the fanciest, cutest thing. But then now it's like, okay, try the simple thing first, which has been like a really good lesson. Scott, one question for you, which was like, what was the thing that like surprised you the most about the entire experience?
The most surprising thing. I guess like the first thing that comes to my mind is that, so I don't have a background in math. Like I didn't take, you know, like a lot of the math courses that are like applicable to machine learning. And so I was kind of assuming like, oh, I'm going to be super far behind the whole time just for that reason. And I think it wasn't the case. I think it was like far more approachable than I was anticipating. And was cool because it like also helped focus like, okay, if I do want to go down this track of like really understanding the math behind everything, like here's where I can focus. And so that was pretty surprising to me. That and just like, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily surprising, but just like how much you've learned at the end of even like one of the courses was just like crazy. Like I went from like not really having any context or understanding to like when I was in meetings at work with people who were like on a data science team, I could like ask more knowledgeable questions or just have a better understanding of what the tasks that they were doing actually looked like and why they were framing them the way they are.
Interesting. We do have an audience question that's pretty fascinating. And feel free to take, either if you could take this one, which is what kind of knowledge do you have to have before starting the track?
I definitely think like having a pretty solid understanding of Python is really key. Python and like what else? Max, feel free to jump in. I'll think about some other stuff too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that a background in Python is definitely helpful. In terms of like where some of the I guess the bugs or annoyances like come up is in some of like the like particulars of like the libraries like NumPy or PyTorch or TensorFlow, particularly for me around things like shaping like tensors or arrays correctly, or you know, getting like data types correct and stuff like that. But I'd say that doesn't take like a deep understanding of Python. I think that's bugs that like everybody will sort of go through as you get used to the particular library. And that's also where I think like the debugging channels in Slack, like during the course, where students can sort of help out with like those types of issues, really comes in handy. But in general, I think some foundation in Python. I never like took a full course in linear algebra, and it's definitely not I wouldn't say a prerequisite, but yeah, I think like once you go into sort of it sort of depends on how you want to be able to look at some of the models and like the deep neural networks in particular. Like the one class I took in college that like touched on this stuff was approached in a much more math way than a practical way. And I actually think like approaching it in the more practical way, the way CoRise does it, gave me better like overall intuitions of how like deep learning works, as opposed to like actually trying to, you know, multiply out all the matrices and whatnot. But yeah, I wouldn't say any strong like math foundation is necessary, but Python in general, I think would definitely help with doing all the assignments.
That and just like generally being able to hunt stuff down on Google will always be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of programming is just like at some point, like I'm going to print everything and see if it makes sense to me. And that I think like the experience of like debugging a bit is like generally like super helpful. Yeah, but I think like Max, you touched upon like one of the ideas behind designing the track this way was like oftentimes like when you're just starting out, there are like questions like how much programming do I need to know? How much math do I need to know? Like, do I need to be a data scientist to be able to do this? But the field is a lot more approachable than it appears to be. And I think there are tons of problems which are interesting for ML. They don't have to be like extremely large, like OpenAI problems. But the goal of the track was like, how do we empower people to like fundamentally understand on like what are good practices of ML? And then how do you bridge the gap between like building an applied intuition and how do you go back and like take that to problems that you can experience? One question, Scott, like you had mentioned earlier on, like now you have a bunch of projects that you're trying to like find time for. Like, would love to hear like one or two things that you're like excited to work on, if like you're allowed to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about it. They're all mainly at this point like ideas in my head, just because I haven't had time to get past that stage. But I think like looking at like weather and weather patterns, I think would be super interesting to do with ML, especially like in areas of like drought or like hurricanes and stuff. I think it would be super interesting to have like just to work with data like that. And to be honest, like I don't know what that will look like in the end, or like what I'll, if anything, end up doing with it. But I think it would be really fun to play around with data like that. I also just like have I used to live in Haiti. I used to like, before I got into tech, I thought I was going to be an anthropology professor. And then the further down that path I went, the more I was like, I don't know if I want this, which is how I eventually got to tech. And so I think a lot of where my head is at is like, how do I combine the skills that I have with like ML or like Python more generally with like what I know about Haiti and what I think can be done with like machine learning in Haiti. I think that's like a way better or way bigger task than I can like fully comprehend right now, because I'm not sure like where the data would come from. And of course, like you need some like pretty good data in order to be able to run a good model. But that's sort of where my head is at, generally speaking. And I'll be sure to like keep everyone updated as I go through that.
Yeah, just put something in the chat because I remember like a month ago or so seeing like DeepMind having produced like a weather model.
Oh yeah.
That was, I'm sure it's an interesting read for everybody.
Yeah, I think one of my I think not famous company paper has been like predicting floodlines. So basically the government releases satellite images of like where like the sea line is. So you can actually see like deterioration over time and potentially even predict like if there'll be a flood or not. And it's like publicly available data, but you can do like super interesting, valuable things with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. One question from the audience is like, how do you explore ideas or create an environment where you're like able to work on these ideas? Like this is pretty general, so I would let either of you take it. Yeah.
Create an environment for ideas that you can directly work on to be possible. So I think when it comes to ideas that involve or can potentially involve machine learning, I think like the first question you really need to answer is like, what data do you have or can you get access to? Because a lot of times that can be a limiting factor to you working on a particular project. And so I think like one skill which can be developed sort of independently of your ML skills is just like your like data skills. And I think I definitely working at Neva, where we did like web search, like worked on a lot of those skills of you know, crawling, indexing, scraping, like whatever it is, like ingesting different pieces of data. And like in some cases you have very clear like data sets to start off with. Like if you want like weather data or something, there's lots of open source data sets that exist, both like from the government or like on Kaggle, you know, abbreviated data sets from companies. So definitely just check out stuff like that. But when that's not the case, you'll need to think through like, oh, how do I go and gather this data? And so like I've had a project idea for doing something over like YouTube videos. And so I would need to think through, okay, like which videos do I want to say download and then be able to process. And then like once you have like a story of like where you're going to get your data, you also need to think about like, okay, is this going to be like a supervised or unsupervised type learning task? Like, do I have labels or do I not have labels? And then, yeah, from there, I guess like as the class sort of taught us. Like you want to create as like fast an iteration loop as possible. And so like just start with the absolute basic thing that you can do. And sometimes for certain projects, that's not even like ML. So like, you know, if you're just trying to test, you know, a concept that, you know, potentially could use ML, but you're trying to test the idea more than the technology, then maybe don't use ML at all at first, and just do something, you know, either hack together or with a simple set of heuristics, and then you can sort of build on it over time. But that's what I would say.
No, that's awesome. I think there's an audience question around like your backgrounds in ML, but I think since you already answered that, I can just type that out. One question that would be interesting, Scott, for you is like you're like looking to transition into an ML role, or maybe Max, you can take this one first, and then Scott, I would love to hear your answer. Is like, Max, you just recently transitioned into an ML role. Like, what do you think, like, your experience making that jump was like?
Yeah, so I guess it's still sort of in progress, to be fair. Like I think I moved into like a new role at a new company that's in a team that's going to be working on problems for which ML is like highly applicable. And my background is in like more general software engineering. And so the role I've sort of like gone into as like a transition, or like in a transition type way, is like sort of there's still a lot of like software engineering components to the role. And like for people who come from traditional like software engineering, like I think a step into like the ML realm could be like somewhere in the ML ops or ML engineering or data engineering type role. And so I'm, to be clear, like not the like data scientist of the team. Like there's another data scientist on the team. Although, you know, coming from the track, I now feel like I'm equipped with both like the vocabulary and also like some of the fundamentals to be able to like work more effectively with these people. But yeah, at the end of the day, like my job is to work on like preventing fraud and detecting fraud. And there's some hard and fast rules that you can sort of go to prevent like simple cases of fraud. But as they get more complex, and as like new attacks sort of come out, more statistical and ML types or ML techniques need to be sort of employed. And my strategy was basically to come in and like offer my previous like experience of software engineering as like sort of a hook to get into the team and to get into the space, and then really try and work super closely with like the data science scientist on my team, and also like the chief like head data people that are like setting up these ML systems and sort of defining what the core life cycle will look like, and really try and help them with whatever they need, and then sort of like, yeah, move step by step like closer in that direction. So that's been my journey thus far.
Scott, you're like still you're still doing your data engineer role, but you have you're thinking of making the transition. Would love to hear how you're like thinking about it.
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't necessarily put like a time frame on like, okay, by this date, I want to be like interviewing for roles or whatever. It's more right now the type of thing where I actually plan on like going through the whole track again on my own, just because like the consistency like of each course is like fairly equal, I thought, but like there's a lot coming at you, especially like if you're brand new to everything. So the way I approached it was like, okay, let me like get as much as I can the first time around, almost like a like drink from the fire hose type situation. And then I want to go back through everything and like, okay, excuse me, like what do I remember and how can I get like sort of the next like grain of information by going through this on my own, and then like also at that same time like work on a project on my own so that I can like, you know, just reinforce everything by like learning by doing, right? In terms of like my role now, I enjoy being a data engineer right now, and I think like a lot of what I'm working on will be fundamental like as an ML engineer. So I think like my goal for the next like year is just to get as much exposure to different data as I can, and like, you know, working with data, ingesting data, manipulating it, and like creating data sets that are like good and reliable, I think for me is like sort of the bigger key right now, because I feel like that will set me up really well for being an ML engineer, especially if I like spend the next year like working on projects myself and that sort of thing. So that's how I'm approaching it, as like it's not really a marathon for me right now. I'm more interested in like making sure that I'm fundamentally sound in doing things the correct way before I really like throw myself into the fold.
No, 100%. I think it's also like fascinating how transferable these skills are. Like if you're good at like building highly accessible like data models, it's like very close to what feature engineering is ultimately. And then like I think Max had talked about like being open to like collecting your own data or like labeling it, just like opens up a world of possibilities. There's one question which came in, which was like, what kind of characteristics or qualities as a person do you have to have before getting into ML?
I mean, I don't really know if there's one answer for this. I think for me, it's just like curiosity is just like such a big piece of it. Curiosity and like a learning growth mindset is super big. I think like for me, those two things like open so many doors and make so many things possible that like I probably have a blind spot for other things, because for me that's how so much starts, that's where I go to immediately.
Yeah, I don't think I could say anything better. I think it is a lot about the curiosity. And I think it helps if like if data has like informed your decisions, or you want it to be able to inform your decisions going forward. But yeah, in general, I think like curiosity will take you like all the way there. And yeah, I definitely don't see like one archetype in ML or AI for sure.
No, I think like the growth mindset point is so important because it's such an iterative exercise, because there's like no real like right answer state. It is an iteration on like how can you like get better every run, and that's pretty much like a one-on-one with like growth mindset. So definitely like super interesting. One other question. Oh, maybe no. Okay, I think we've covered those. One other question, Max, for you potentially is like, as you've started to think about like your own projects, like how have you thought about like either like thinking about the most complicated techniques? Are you like trying to like figure out like problems that you are excited by, or are you like more looking into the techniques that you are excited by? Like how do you balance between those? Yeah.
Between
So like I think like say if you were interested in like video generation, or like you saw a new cool paper come out and you're trying to see if there are like other places you can apply that. Like,
I see. Yeah, I unfortunately like am like a little bit disconnected from like a lot of the, I'd say, modern like literature, just because I'm no longer in like the academic or university setting. It was actually one of the things I really liked about going through the track at CoRise, is like bringing me a little bit back into that like student mindset, where you know, people would just be posting like, oh, what like interesting papers that they've read, or like what's sort of coming out, because I sort of got that through osmosis a lot when I was back in college, but it's a little bit less the case now that I'm working full time. But yeah, I'd say like for me, I sort of focus on like I'd focus first on like what problems I find interesting in my life, and not necessarily like data focused or not, but just like, you know, what types of things do I care about and want to sort of like, what am I most curious about, I guess. And then from there, like there's a couple different areas of like interests I have. And as an engineer, I like building things and like building tools that can help me or make something more efficient. And so this has sort of like led me to like problem spaces that for which like ML can be you know, a technique to solve something. And so like an example of this is like I have like a long history of studying like foreign languages, in particular Chinese. And so I'm always like on the lookout for like either building or trying new tools that that help make language learning, the process of language learning, easier. And it like so happens that like all of the new and interesting like advancements in like NLP and text processing and text summarization and stuff like that can enable like really interesting like product experiences in like language learning. And so I'm sort of starting from like this core interest area and then saying like, okay, like what would I want as a person? And then saying like, okay, in what ways can ML perhaps like make this process easier or better? So that's sort of how I think about ideas.
hey, Scott, do you want to chime in?
Though
I totally agree with everything Max just said. I think like starting from a like place of like where it's personal to you, like whatever that means for you, I think is always a good way to go. Yeah, I think Max said it perfectly.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe Scott, one question for you is like, you were clearly working full time, like while doing the track, like how much was like time commitment like, and how did you like balance doing both?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the cool thing about the track is that it kind of, you will get from it what you want to get from it. So like if you have a super limited time commitment, you can still like go through it and, you know, work on projects, and maybe like there's like, it seemed like most of the projects had sort of like an optional component to them where it was like, oh, if you got this far and want to keep going, like try X, Y, and Z, right? So there's always that option to like go further. So for me, like just like working and having a lot going on in life, I was like, most of the time I was like, I can't go for the optional stuff right now just because I don't have time. But the cool thing is, like I was mentioning earlier, like you have access to everything after, so you can go back and like check out those optional things or do whatever you want. Time commitment though, I would definitely put in a few hours a week, just because like I would sometimes like read through the notes and stuff like more than once, and like spend time like trying different things before I was like considered myself done with something for the week, right? So it's really just about what you want, how much time you want to put into it and what you want to get out of it. Just like I think, you know, any course or like anything life or school. Like you get out what you want from it. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Like maybe like a follow-up question is like, obviously this was like a live cohort experience. Like in both of your opinions, like how was that contrasted with like either like trying to do this on your own or using a textbook? Like what were like the big differences you both observed?
Yeah, I think there's something about the live cohort experience or the live experience in general that like just somehow sets different like internal like accountability, like senses of accountability. Like I don't know exactly psychologically what it is, but just even though I you know, it's not like in CoRise, like if you miss the Sunday at midnight deadline, like, you know, you're done for the rest of the course. Like there's definitely flexibility within the course. But I'd say just like having some schedule defined for you and having, you know, some sort of like social or like cohort sort of enthusiasm and like dare I say like camaraderie almost, like just sets like a completely different like sense of accountability in you and like wanting to get things done on time and like wanting to do right by like all the other students working beside you and the instructors who are working really hard for you. And so I've, you know, tried going through like textbooks like previously and even other types of like tutorials. Like I think there are like some decent like tutorials online for a bunch of different packages, but I'd say those are sort of more focused on like either specific frameworks or specific things, whereas I'd say CoRise does like a pretty good job of like, you know, using some of the more popular frameworks, but like putting them within the context of gaining like fundamentals and intuition about like the general subject. And so, yeah, I definitely say it like sort of put as a learning experiences in a separate class from like just purely reading a textbook or going through some of the online tutorials. And something at least I found for myself is extremely beneficial and helpful just to get going sort of as a catalyst to get into a particular area.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think there's just something different about knowing that there's like, you know, live meetings once or twice a week that you can show up to. And if you want, ask questions. I think like one thing I've noticed a lot with like, whether it be a textbook or it's some other like online course, is that there's always a point where you have a question, but you can't ask a textbook a question. And sometimes those like online resources have a forum or whatever, but in all likelihood, like my experience is like a lot of the time you don't get a response, or you get a response that doesn't help you and maybe confuses you more. So I think being able to go to a live session at CoRise and say like, hey, I don't understand this, and have someone who is like working in industry or is an academic and is able to like explain that to you in like normal regular terms, is there's like not a comparison for that. And I think also the cool thing is like there's this whole async component to it, where like even now if I had a question, I would post it in Slack to like our cohort, and I'm pretty sure at least one person would respond, which is like, that's unique because that's not the case, I don't, in my experience with other like online learning platforms.
Yeah. No, I think like a huge shout out to like Andrew and Mike and Kevin and Eric, who have like been phenomenal instructors, and also just like the amount of support and love they've given to like each and every person in the class has been like tremendous to see. Yeah, I think it's like they spend so much time like creating the course that it's actually like a lot of work.
Yeah, and it definitely shows. Like going through, you can see as a student, like the amount of work and thought that's been put into everything, like definitely comes across. And I think that's just one more thing that makes you want to succeed and do well, is like, oh, the instructors are putting in a lot of work, which makes me want to also put in work. It's not like they just like slap this together because it's part of their job or whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think we're like just starting to hit time. So if there are like a couple of more questions, we could take that. Or
I saw there's one question from Eric in the Q&A just about like understanding the entire process. And Eric, I don't really know your background, but from what your post says, I think the track is what you're looking for based on what you wrote there.
yeah, I think Eric, just to like give a bit more detail, the track is basically designed for like, hey, you have some software engineering experience, or like, but you're thinking about like, what are good problems in machine learning? How do you apply those? How do you like frame them? How do you like think about like rigorously about metrics, baseline, then go over deep learning, and then also like start thinking about like, how do you deploy these models? What does your end-to-end flow look like in like working on these? And how do you like start thinking about like the importance of like data quality in like this iterative cycle? So I'm happy to like share more information about the track offline as well. Yeah, so I think if you're a full stack developer, this might like actually be a really good fit. Awesome. Max, Scott, any closing thoughts? But otherwise, like, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been like super fun to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say, like now that like there's this sort of like community or like alumni community of like CoRise students, I'm like actually like super excited to like sort of continue to keep up with a lot of these people, and also now that I'm sort of butting into like a little bit more of an ML role, like, you know, asking more questions, you know, with people that have taken other classes and probably have a lot more ML experience than I do, as well as like the teachers and whatnot. It feels like a fantastic resource having going forward. So I'm excited about that.
It's awesome. Max, we did just announce a data science for security and risk class, so you might be a very good fit for that.
Sounds good.
And we'll give you a friends and family discount. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been super fun. And if you have more questions, please email hello@corise.com, and we're happy to like share more information about anything. Yeah, thanks again, Scott, Max. Really fun chatting.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.